we will talk about inclusive cities and really try to understand um, what are our biggest challenges, what has happened over all these years, what has led to either city being inclusive or not, and what might be the reasons for it. But at the same time, we may want to learn from them what all are they doing, what are the solutions they are trying to provide to various cities, to their own cities, but at the same time, to what are they seeing from other cities as well. So I think we'll keep it very open. We'll obviously let them talk about their work, and then we'll have questions. So I will basically ask one question, and a couple of them can answer, and then we'll open it up for audience to ask questions as well, and then we'll do a couple of those rounds depending upon however the momentum continues. So I think let's get started. I'm Vatsal Bhatt. I come from US Green Building Council and Director for Cities and Neighborhood Developments. We had recently developed a new certification system for cities called LEED for Cities. And that is where we're talking about wellness, infrastructure, at the same time, equitability and prosperity as well in cities. So I think for me, it is very interesting to learn from you all, bringing various different backgrounds to really see how do you tackle inequality? What do you do to really improve overall conditions in the way that do you really invite more of participation? If you do it, how do you do it? Informal settlements are a big part of many of the city's discussions. So I think we will try to see it, which are their priorities and how do they tackle it. And I'll start with right from here. Tunji, please go ahead and explain your work, please.
My name is Dr. Tunji John Asaolu, and by 2015 I was elected to represent Nigerians in the Assembly of African Union's Economic, Social, and Cultural Councils, AU ECOSOC, which made up with two representatives from each country. And if I'm talking about the 54 countries of 55 countries that made up with African Union. So I'm happen to be a Nigerian representative in that assembly, and the assembly is the AU ECOSOC is umbrella and assembly of the civil society that made up with the African Union, because over the year, the African Union also realized that their work is not going down to the grassroots, and for them to have their work being, effective at the grassroots, for them to come out to have the representative from the citizen by themselves, and for them to have the representative from the citizens to come out with the what is called AU ECOSOC, which the composition, like I said, made up with two representatives from each country, and it's from the civil society. So in a way, you can say that the AU ECOSOC is a parliament of the civil society. So we are now talking about, and our major role is to advocate and to make sure that the policies, the programs, and of the union is being implemented at the member states. So whatever that is being designed at the top of the African Union's level, that is to say the Assembly of the Head of State and Government, so we are the one that take it to the grassroots. And before I joined them, I worked with Africa Youth International Development Foundation as Executive Director. So I'm happy to be here, and I think that whatever we have discussed here too is also an avenue for me to also take it to the grassroots for it to be implemented. So that's it for now. Let me just stop there so as the good.
Thank you. And how do you see the relevance of your work to the topic of today's discussion, inclusive cities, empowering citizens?
There's something that I left out that I did not say. Is, apart from the fact of representing Nigerians in that organ, I'm also heading a committee which we call Social Affairs and Health Cluster Committee. And my membership is also across the 55 countries of Africa. When I'm talking about building inclusive ecosystem, we are talking about the social aspect, because there is no way that we have an inclusive city and you not talk about the social amenities. For example, it's talking about education. I remember my background, of course, when I left the village to the city. What actually took me to the city is because of there are some certain things, amenity that is not present in the village. Otherwise, if you have all those things present there, that you'll not be thinking of going to the city. And of course, you can school before you have a very good school in the village, you have to move out. If you actually want to have a good educated and sound education background, you have to move to the city. So if all those things are in the village, and of course, I see no reason why the city will also be crowded, because it's like basically what you need is at your disposal. So we are talking about the city that is inclusive. We talk about the very good and sound education system. You talk about the electricity, so you have all those things present at the city. And you talk about the waters, affordable waters, and like and in those states, if you're from Africa, I mean, if you conversant with Africa, you know what I'm talking about. That before you can get a very good water in the village, you have to trek, miles to go and fetch water. And these are the things that we are talking about. That in an inclusive city, we are looking for a situation whereby what you need is at your disposal, and what you also need, you don't need to say, okay, this one belongs to the rich people, and this one also belongs to the poor people. So we are looking for an environment where the rich can actually live and the poor can actually live. And because I see no reason why we classify ourselves. Oh, this is where class that I belong. This is class they also belong, because when God created all of us, I don't think he makes someone also different. A soul is also a soul. So we now need to see how we can also bring ourselves together, because we are talking about the ecosystem. Like for example, the animals. I don't think animals also separate themselves. When you talk about the social animals, they work toward themselves as a group, and it is that spirit that we can achieve much, because a teamwork. If you come together, you achieve most result. That if you are classifying themselves, and of course, what you get is also less. And I think that is why governments are always facing, because they try to work with some certain people while they neglect also some certain people. If you continue doing that, then we'll continue to be having problems, especially what we are also seeing today. So,
Thank you, sir. Ayal, can you just explain who you are and how your work relates to the topic of this panel?
I think the allure of cities, in many senses, is their diversity. I think the reason cities became so successful over the years was the fact that they brought a lot of people together in the same place and kind of catalyzed the idea of exchanging ideas, jobs, things between us. And that only became possible because of having different people from different backgrounds in the same place, bringing different influences into the same mix. And in many senses, if you look at the cities that are strong economic centers today, they are always have a very different sense of backgrounds of people. A lot of migrant communities that moved into them over the years, a lot of people coming in for business today. And that is, I think, a very big and very important part of what makes a successful city today. But that doesn't happen on its own. To make a city inclusive is something that needs to be a work in progress, both in terms of policy and in terms of actual actions and actual even physical design of the city that allows it over time. So I come from Tel Aviv, Israel, which is not a very diverse city. Israel in general is not a very diverse place. But Tel Aviv in that mix is unique in the sense that it has a big population of migrant communities, a big population of refugees, and a big population of foreign people coming in. And I think that's part of what makes it unique and special. From my personal perspective, well, I have a startup company called Zen City. We're here as part of the Global Urban Innovators Program. And what we deal with is trying to understand the people in the city. And I think that relates very strongly to the idea of inclusive cities, because to me, inclusivity starts from listening to the needs of people. To make cities more inclusive, first of all, it has to start from hearing the different voices that are in the city. And in many senses, the way that we, do civic engagement today, do community outreach today, in many senses that doesn't bridge that gap. That even sometimes widens the gap, because the people that come to these kinds of things, public hearings, answer phone surveys, are usually the people who are the stronger people. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring a new approach to that by collecting data from many different sources and bring that in. And I'm happy to say that in many of the cities that we're working with, we're hearing a much wider range of voices than the traditional sense. But
Very interesting. Very interesting. Roshan?
Yes, Roshan Ul Ismail. I am the mayor of Kandahar city, and Kandahar remains the second biggest city of Afghanistan. And I am representing Kandahar city since last 2 years. And unfortunately, we are facing with a lot of challenges in our region, particularly the insecurity and instability comes first, and later on the poverty, and of course the informal settlements. So I think this promotion of the inclusive ecosystem comes first, and I'm very attentive to address this issue because we realize that we have master plans since many years, but we cannot implement them. So unless we do not have the inclusive system and there is no voice of citizens in municipal decision making, it will be very hard to address development in our cities. So therefore, I think we should work to promote inclusive ecosystems, a system which is by the citizens, for the global objectives.
Makes sense. Archana, what do you think?
Hello, everyone. So I'm Archana Vimalapalli. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Washington, D.C. And when we talk about inclusive cities, I think from DC's standpoint, we have actually explicitly called it out. So we call ourselves, the hub for inclusive innovation. And while that's focused mainly on innovation, what we really recognize is people tend to mix up diversity and inclusion, and they're two different things. And while it's easier to achieve diversity, real success happens when you include. Real success happens when you don't get judged by who you are, what you are, where you come from, but you have access to opportunity and the ability to succeed, or access to services the way anyone else has. And so it's important to recognize that. And so the administration in DC has sort of recognized that and really has sort of focused in on a couple of different ways. So the way we're approaching really calling out inclusion is, one, we actually state it. So that's one of our key goals. When we talk about smart cities in DC, we define smart cities as a city that's inclusive and equitable. And that's key, because what that means is every investment we make in the city is made with the intention of making sure there's an equitable opportunity for everyone. And then on the flip side, while we as government are thinking that way, we also want to make sure we're doing the right things that the residents care about. So we have engagement forums with our residents every quarter where we meet with them and present all of the technologies and areas we're looking at. So I'm giving you a technology perspective, where we say, how does this appeal to you? What does this mean for you? And are we heading in the right direction? So it's getting that input and making people feel vested, because we strongly believe that when you are included, when you're part of the conversation, you are more vested, you're more involved. You plan a longer term plan on your life in the city, and in the end, the city prospers.
Exactly. Investing back into the
Yep.
system and all. That is great. So let's start from there. Actually, you touched upon a very interesting point of view about creating plans. So there are many urban planners and talking about cities and new cities and all. So creating plans in such a way that includes and all those other aspects of it. So I think Tongji also wanted to talk about long-term plans, 2063 and all those discussions. So let us get started from where you ended. And the next thought process is that when you create those long-term plans, how do you each one, like what Archana just said, how do you each one try to include inclusivity and other aspects of diversity, and then openness and all those discussions? We can get started from here.
Thank you very much to give us an insight of where we are going. Like I said, that African Union, for some time they know that their programs, some of their program is not actually going down the grassroots. And when you look at the history of the African Union, rightly back from 1963, that was where the head of state came together to come out with what was called then and the Organization of African Unity. I think the purpose as at then was to free themselves from the colonial masters and all that, and to gain independence. And going down the ladder from 1963 to 2013, they celebrated the 50th anniversary. And from that 2003, they looked at themselves that how do we want ourselves, the Africa we want in another 50 years? And that was why they sent that framework, which will come out of Agenda 2063. It was called Agenda 2063, that is to say from 2013 to 2063. How do we see ourselves as an Africa? So we are looking for a situation whereby we are looking at ourselves in the next 50 years, that the liberations of Africa, where someone can wake up from South Africa without even getting a visa, and they will land in Nigeria, so vice versa for other African countries. So we are looking for an Africa where you can wake up and you can trade, without even any hindrances from Nigeria, the train systems and all that. So when we are talking about the new city, inclusiveness, I think that is what that Agenda 2023 is all about. So it's a journey of 50 years. And we know that 50 years is a very long journey. So in their own wisdom, they have also break it down into 10 years plan. So as we speak now, we are in the first 10 years implementation plan of that Agenda 2023. I think far back now, we are spending like 3 years back. So we still have like another 6 years to come out with the first plan. So it's something that we are breaking down into 10 years plan. And after these 10 years, we come together to evaluate ourselves to see the journey so far, how far have we gone? Are we actually in line with this plan? So the plan is, that's long plan, and there is also short plan. So in the short plan, we are looking for a situation whereby, like, for example, what we are doing now, I said that ECOSOC is to be sure that one of our roles is to be sure that all the policies, the programs of the African Union is being implemented in all the member states. And as a result of this, what we are doing in Nigeria is we have invited some foreign investors to come and actually invest in Nigeria in terms of, towards the implementation of this Agenda 2063. And what we are doing now is to build a city. We call it Usman Lake town. So it's about 40 minutes away from the city of Abuja. And as I speak, the people that have gotten a land about 240 hectares, where they can build schools, sport development, hospitals, all you need is in that town. And it's as big as even the Abuja itself. So by doing this, you will discongest the populations of even the people that are, squeezing themselves in Abuja and move them away from there. So it's a way that everybody have something doing, and that is where you will work, not as you work for some mind before you get to a place of work. So what you are doing is actually in that city. You can farm there, you can produce, there's a market. So, in when you do it, by the time that you use that one as a piloting stage, a successful model, they will take it out from Nigeria to another country. So these are the ways, and I believe that at the end of the first, these first plans of the first 10 years, we should be able to come out and evaluate ourselves that how successful are we. Then, before the 2063 we are talking about, and if 14 vehicle, you see that Africa will be a place that every other people will love to be.
Makes sense. Any other thoughts?
I mean, I guess it's one thing to plan, but you have to come up with some core values for your city, or at least some core characteristics that you're going to focus on every initiative you take for your city. And I think for DC, we recognize that, one, we wanted to be resilient no matter what. But the second, we wanted to be equitable. In every decision we made, every investment we made, we wanted to make sure we never lost sight of equity and what that meant. And then we looked at, sustainability and collaboration. But so when we define those, what happens is then as you build your comprehensive plans for the city, or when you build out, your incremental plans that complement, your like long-term vision, the values always stay, and the values are always called out. And I think it's very important. And I think more so now than ever, if you don't create an inclusive environment, you don't create those opportunities of access, you will lose not just the culture that the city has, but you will also, I think, as a city, not see the growth you'd like to see. One example I can give you that we're doing in DC is when we focused on innovation and getting startups into the city, we had this big discussion about, well, what's our area of focus going to be, right? Every city will tend to pick, they'll say, well, we're on biomedical, we're looking at, autonomous vehicles. Everyone loves to pick a niche. And when we had this discussion, I said, why do we need to pick a niche? If the idea is to be inclusive, and if you want to create an environment where you can have any idea and come to the table and build it, we should be that city where you could be anybody you want, but come, create an idea, and build it out and scale it. And we as a city need to create that environment where you don't have to be in a specific niche. And so for us, we set up, our mayor just recently launched an inclusive innovation incubator with that intent. It was the intent to say for anyone that ever wanted to have, build a company, start up, get going, here's an opportunity for you to get going. And you don't have to look a certain way, be a certain style, be a certain age to have a startup. And that itself is very empowering. It's not that we have an incubator. Every city has one. So there's nothing new to that, right? But it's the fact that we call it an inclusive innovator. That's the thing, is we're explicitly calling it out. And I think when you do that, people start to pay attention to it more.
Makes sense. That's a very interesting concept. We'll get back to some of the specific elements in these aspects. You talked about various wide range of things. But for an example, in our discussion yesterday, you were talking about informal settlements.
Sure.
Like coming from India, I have seen that quite often, and how that gets attended and all. So there are always some elements in our cities that are always some issues, right? I believe Mayor Bowser, when she came in, it was homelessness was also a big aspect of it and all. So just some of those specific elements that you all think are some of the pressing issues, and how do you tackle them?
Well, I mean, I agree that plans are very important, particularly the long-term plans, as you mentioned. But let's imagine and talk about the countries that they are facing with the problems, particularly the conflicts. So, I mean, municipal planning or city planning, the long-term city planning doesn't work for these countries. And it is a reality. As I mentioned before, like, for example, for Kandahar, like, we have a city master plan since last 40, 50 years. So who is going to implement the city planning now? How we are going to pave the way toward its implementation? We cannot do it. For example, the city is not in a stable situation. Every day, like, for example, when there are some pressure from the Pakistan government and the Afghan refugees and returnees, so they are returning back and they are settled in our cities. Imagine like how you are going to manage a city with more than 100,000 populations of returnees in each day. It's not possible. And also the informal settlements. If you do not have an inclusive planning system, so of course you cannot implement it. Important is that we prepare the plan, or city planning should be done in a manner that you have the participation of your local citizens. That time it's very well and it works. And if you, for example, prepare according to international level, international standards, you prepare a plan, then how you are going to implement it? It's very problematic and it's very challenges. If you remove a family from a household, from one house, and then you remove or maybe you destroy the house because this house is located in the middle of a road that you are going to pave. So it doesn't work. It's very problematic because based on the consideration of the human rights and all these international standards and values. So therefore, we see that it is important to have inclusive planning systems, or maybe the voice of your citizens in the municipal planning. We worked for this in our city in Kandahar. So now we have the municipal advisory boards. So we have the representatives of each street or each sub-district within our city. When we are planning for the future of our city, so then we are hearing their voices and actually we receive their approval. And later on, we go toward implementation because the community elders or those who has very good reputation within their communities, then they can support implementation of the planning. What I insist on it is that beside planning, on our desk and tables, it is very important that how we implement. We should work for implementation mechanisms of the plans. So therefore, inclusiveness for the city is very vital.
Makes sense. Archana, any pressing issue in your city that you are trying to address, the most pressing issue on this aspect?
I mean, I think, every city has your standard 10 issues. I always maintain that the priority just changes depending on different cities. So I don't, again, it comes back to for every issue you handle, right? I'll give you an example. You talk about transportation, right? One of the biggest challenges we have is how do we manage the congestion we have? How do we get people around? But if you talk to different communities, right, in the city, I'll have one neighborhood that says, I want the fastest way to get from point A to point B. They don't care about the price, they just need the quickest way to get by. But if I go to a completely different community, they have a different perspective. They just need to be able to affordably get from A to B. They don't have a way to even get to B.
Access.
Right? So now when you're talking about from an equity perspective and designing, or planning for maybe solutions that really can meet the scale of needs across the city, you're now saying, okay, well, what is that going to take, right? How do I make sure the population that wants to get someplace quickly has the ability to do so? And yet, how do I create options for those people that just want an economical way to get from A to B? And so you have to plan for those and you have to put those, put those into mind. And that's what we're looking at.
Very interesting. Ayal, you were trying to say?
Well, I really liked, Archana, what you said before about access being the main point for equitable cities. And I think, from my perspective, that the interesting access is access to the decision-making process and access to, being able to contribute to the decisions that are being made in the city, the discussion that's being made in the city, to have a seat at the table in that sense. And there have been a lot of solutions to that. I think you guys mentioned the community boards and what's going on in DC. And it's always a question whether to encourage people to participate in the tools, in the policies that you have already in place, or is it right to reach out and find them wherever they are? So
I can answer that one because you have to do both. You can't have only one way of people reaching you. People reach you in multiple ways, and you have to keep all of those channels open. So I'll give you an example. We were rewriting our data policy, and we wanted to look at how we were responsible about it because we wanted it to be open, yet at the same time we wanted to recognize there was significant privacy concerns. So we said, how do we balance this out? And so let's write this policy. But when we wrote the draft, we put it online for everyone to comment. And we actually asked people, not just within the city, but we had people from all over the country comment on it. And then when they got done, we said, who didn't comment on this? Let's go find those people that didn't give us feedback. So we then reached out to all those privacy groups that cared about it. We reached out to the open data groups that cared about it. And so we went beyond the access. And then we had a forum where we actually presented again, went out and said, here's this policy. So it took us a year. It was a labor of love, right, by the time it got signed. But it was worth it because when we signed it, the people that came to the event when we launched that policy were all in support of it because that was where we got people's input. We included what they said. We listened to concerns on both sides. And even the people that were advocating from one extreme to the other, both saw perspectives. So at the end of the day, was everyone 100% happy? Probably not. But they saw the reasoning as to why we did what we did. And now this policy and the execution and implementation of this policy has a higher chance of success because we got that support early on, versus if we just rolled it out, right? So that's
I think what happens there is a great example of the fact that you need to also go out and reach people where they are, and not just kind of encourage them to go on your website and comment on that. You have to do some outreach and think where are the places that the the people that I don't reach, that don't have even the ability to ask for a seat at the table because
Yep.
they don't have the means or the know-how to do so. How can you reach out to them and find them where they are and get in touch with them? So I think that's, from my perspective, that's one of the biggest challenges right now in terms of, I think everybody mentioned the importance of engaging with citizens and making them part of the decision-making process. But one of the biggest challenges is finding where they are and hearing their voices, even if they don't know how to ask
That's
for it.
very interesting. Tunji?
Yeah, I think basically there are two major factors to this because we are looking at talking about planning or carry the citizens along or that. You know, before now, coming from my own background, and I was from the background of the civil society, you know, the way we speak as a civil society is also different, especially where you come out from the civil society and join government. The language change. And what we see where you are out there, different from what you see where you are in there. For example, I'm talking about myself. Before I joined African Union, I challenged government. Why these things is not happening? Governments should do this, governments should do that. But where you move out from the government now, at the level of African Union, and you know that African Union is, you know, the 55 country, the government of the 55 country coming together. So I see things in another different dimension. So when we are talking about whether we carry the citizen along or we don't carry the citizen along, there are some fundamental issues that we need to take into consideration whenever we want to, you know, come out with any plan. For example, my brother talked about, you know, why some things are not working. I think we need to first of all look at the government perspective, the political stability, the enabling environment. Because nobody will come and invest in your country out of the sympathy. Oh, let me sympathize with you, let me carry this. They have to look at the profit margin. Is it a good place to do business? Or they can also get their money back. That is the fourth point of view, whether you want to build a city and you are calling for someone or people to come and invest, they have to first of all look at the political environment. I think in that angle, the government have to look, you know, how they can make the environment to look, you know, habitable for people to come and do business, because that is the very point of view. If you can speak from here to tomorrow that you want to build a city that is inclusive, if the environment is not inclusive for people to come and invest, they won't come. And another thing that we also need to take into dimension is tradition and culture. We came out from the side event this morning where we have someone talking that if you build whatever, you know, whether you build that place with a gold and the people that you want to put inside does not have the knowledge and perspective for what they want to achieve from there, they will still go back from where you pick them from. He said that they actually built a free houses for them, and after for some times, they sold it out and they went back to where they are coming from. I think when we are planning a city, then we also need to take that cultural and traditional perspective into consideration, because these are the things that make that thing to be sustained. Otherwise, you will have a city that nobody will be staying inside. So these are the things that we also need to take into consideration. So number one, the very point of view, the key factor is the political stability and enabling environment that governments have to also first of all put into consideration. Otherwise, we have a very good planning. We will still carry the people along, and you know, planning without enabling environment, it look like just a picture in the paper that's never been implemented. So these are the things that we also need to take into consideration.
Definitely. Thank you. With that, should we open the floor for some questions? Please go ahead. Brave one.
Question to the panel, in the context of the fourth industrial revolution again. So as robotics and artificial intelligence changes the nature of work, the conventional model of cities as the hub of economic opportunities, jobs, may not always stay the same. So people may not need to be in cities to work or live. And this may mean a distributed scenario of cities, right, where megacities today look different tomorrow. And this could also mean a negative or a positive for people's quality of life in that future. So what possible futures do you see in your cities in the context of this change? And where do you sit on the tension of growth for your city versus other alternative futures?
So change is a constant. I think you need to personally make peace with that, and as a city too, you need to accept that. And any city that isn't changing and growing is probably going to stagnate at some point. But to your point, if you think of AI, it is at the end still artificial intelligence, and with humans, you have a social component and you have emotional intelligence that will never be replaced. And I think that's an important metric to always keep in mind. And this is where inclusion becomes a key metric on how you establish your cities, because when people are invested in cities from a social perspective, right? So from the city standpoint, we can create the environment where people have environments where they can mix, they have the opportunities, they have the access. Then your reason for staying in the cities are not just your job, right? There's a lot more factors that play in. And so it's from a city and a government standpoint, that's what you need to do, is you need to create that platform where people have the ability to pursue whatever else is coming along, right? You're planning ahead. I mean, the fact that AI is gonna, take off shouldn't be a surprise to any big city. We should all be planning for it in our outer years to say, how is that going to change our dynamic? And as we make our plans, we sort of factor that in. And so in my mind, I don't think it's going to, for the cities that are not prepared, I think it may change it drastically for them. For the cities that really plan and use that as a good way, I think it'll actually help cities. I don't think it's going to hurt.
Good thought. Any other one?
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. And I think we can see today that the process is not going that way. We see even, today the tech industry allows you to literally work from wherever you want. I can do what I do, whether from my Tel Aviv office or from some other places, because I just need my laptop with me. But tech companies everywhere are moving into cities and not out of them. And businesses are moving into cities and not out of them. Residents are moving into cities, even though today it's easier than ever to move outside of the city and to still be in touch and get from place to place faster. So I think in many senses, the cities it attracts people, the economic opportunity is a very big part of it, but it's also this meeting of a lot of people in one place that provides new ideas, new opportunities, not necessarily in the fact that your office is there, in the fact that you meet more people and you meet more kinds of ideas and things, and that's what makes cities hubs of opportunity and innovation. And I think that's not going to change, even when there's IoT sensors everywhere and artificial intelligence everywhere. On the contrary, it's going to get stronger and stronger, and the big cities will be even more places where they attract people coming in to learn those things and to learn more opportunities.
Makes sense. Any other thoughts, questions?
So my question is with regards to the kinds of people who cities should think about when you are trying to be inclusive. So over the past couple of years and decades, what we might call the expanding moral circle means that many previously disenfranchised or marginalized groups are increasingly becoming the subject of conversation and expanding legal and political rights in cities. How do you think that city managers or whoever is involved can best navigate the kinds of controversies or conflicts which arise, especially as these groups drop against previously established conservative views about whose rights or needs ought to be considered, especially in the light of the fact that some of these groups may have differing or sometimes less access to the kinds of technologies or communication methods which we want to use to speak to them with. For example, some of these groups may be less economically advantaged and therefore have a lot less access to the kinds of communication technologies which we now want to use to speak to citizens and so on.
I think it goes back to, again, you can have a diverse representation. And when I say diverse, I'm not just talking about racially diverse, right? You could be diverse based on whatever background, opportunities you have in life. And when you have a diverse population, but you don't create opportunities for inclusion, and when I say opportunities for inclusion, it's as a city, either create an environment or a way for people to know and interact, that's when you have segregation. And when you start having that, that's when you have either groups that get left out, groups that are tend to naturally come together because they have something in common. While it's not wrong to have groups that come together on a common theme. You also want to get people to really go outside their bounds and really interact. And I think that's where the cities have a responsibility, and they have to really drive that piece. Like in DC, I'll give you an example. Just from a purely racial standpoint, in the city, the mayor is very, very strong about that, right? So we have on the arts and humanities side, tremendous amount of festivals and events and activities where we really encourage people to go attend and learn about different cultures and different environments and different backgrounds, because unless you do that and you experience that, you don't learn and you don't grow. It's not that you have to go participate every single day, but you have an appreciation of what people bring to the table when they're different. The other aspect is, we may all look the same, but we may just have different preferences in what we eat, or or the way we dress, or what we'd like to do during our day. I don't watch any sports. I can tell you single-handedly, I get excluded out of 20 conversations on a daily basis, right? But how do you include that one person that doesn't do the same things you do? You have to sort of start it at an organizational level. So in the city, we actually do it in the city departments too. We force all of our employees to have that inclusive mentality. And I think that's important, because when the city government starts adopting that and sort of starts looking at that, it helps you when you start planning out and looking out in your communities. But the cities have to drive it.
Very interesting. Now, can we talk about technology in terms of how do you use technology to increase the inclusivity, adaptability, and stuff like that?
So I think on our perspective, when we say tools for inclusion, we use all mediums to reach our residents. So it's, you use your social media platforms, you use your standard, we even mail out newsletters to people still, right? But it's recognizing first who your residents are.
Sure.
What is your diverse base of residents? Right? What do they do? How have they consumed information? And how would they be willing to consume information? And then how do you get it to them? I'll give you an example. We have a significant senior population that has used to consuming information a certain way. So what we recognized is, while we can do all of this social media campaign where we put information out, they need to know how to access the information. So what we have in a complementary ways, we actually have a van that's equipped with 12 laptops. We call it our mobile technology lab, that drives around the city and has training opportunities for people. And we set this van up with the intention of saying, let's actually take training and access and opportunity to people that can't get to training easily. And so we use that now sometimes to train our seniors, right? So when we're putting this information out, we also show them how they can get access to it. So it's creating those kinds of opportunities. So you take the existing tool set and then you find a way to disseminate the information out.
Tweak it differently. Yeah, makes sense. Go
ahead. Technology, the world is going global. And there is no way that you can rule out technology out of an inclusive city. For example, building a city, before now, the city will rely on the electricity, the power that is generated by other means. But going forward now, we are using solar system in ways where we cannot, I'm speaking at the perspective of Africa, where there is a particular city that I can say out of light for almost like 2-3 weeks, where introducing the solar system, apart from the fact that it's environmental friendly, and of course, what we are experiencing in terms of electricity problem not being in place. And of course, before now, even as I speak, there is still a village that does not have access to communication. It's just like in those days that you have to write a letter, or you have to look for someone that is traveling to the village to send a note to give to your parents. But in an inclusive city, you can wake up from your room and carry your phone and talk to someone near you. So when you talk about effective communication, it's also very effective and needed in an inclusive city. So these are the technologies that we need to also introduce. Even before now, I said that if I have an opportunity, for example, in Nigeria, to be in the position of power, I will ask Toyota to come and assemble or to have a plant in Nigeria. Why I said this is the 50% of the vehicle that Toyota is producing is coming to Africa. So why must you base on importing those things into Africa rather than inviting them to come and start producing those things in Africa? I think these are the other ways where we are talking about the technology. So we can have so many as industry that relies on the modern day technology. By having that, we are bringing a new city that will bring inclusiveness in the situation whereby you have an industry, you have where I can also, you are creating job. A lot of people will also come even from the village that also contribute their own quota to the socio-economic development of that particular country. So these are the things that bringing technology into it is very, very important and all that. I think that's just my own aspect of view.
Good thought. Any other? Go ahead.
Yeah. I think there are multiple modalities that can be accounted. Number one is the participatory development approach is very vital because when you are preparing the development plans for your cities, and of course you should hear from communities. And then it is also possible within the city that you establish the community development councils. Those people, they do not have access to electricity and also to technology, for example, mentioned earlier that they cannot give their comments via Facebook or social media. So it is important that they give their idea to the community elders. So community development councils should be directly involved or should be coordinated with municipalities itself. This is one modality. And the second one is that, of course, in every quarter of the year, maybe it's possible for municipalities or the cities to present to the citizens that what they have done. And particularly, it shows transparency. Once you have transparency within your municipalities and you have the accountability, so the better way is for the rule of law in your city. And also you are receiving the very positive or maybe the negative aspects of the issues from your citizens, which can be addressed. And also I think another modality should be that we manage the polling surveys or the focus group surveys within our city. So particularly, we should realize from our citizens that what particular need they have for the city development. Maybe the clean water, maybe the sewerage system, or maybe the solid waste management system, or whatever. So particularly, we should really take care to the voice of the citizens that what they really need. And the other one is, of course, the social media. Maybe the Facebook accounts, maybe the LinkedIn, maybe Twitter, that you can receive the comments of the citizens, analyze them, and later on address them in your annual planning.
Good thinking. Ayal?
So thanks for setting up the stage because that's exactly what our company tries to do. Our goal is basically to use technology to provide as wide a range of voices as we can to local government decision making. So we take data from various sources, social media, like you mentioned, and 311 calls, so reports to the municipal hotline, and any other place where citizens interact with government or share their opinions. And we try to bring them all together into one unified view that puts all those voices into an actionable or easy to understand graph. So I think in that sense that the power of technology here is that we can do analysis that would have taken a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of energy in a pretty simple way or real-time way that allows to actually take this wide range of voices and make decisions on top of that. And just regarding the comment before, I think digital divide is a very big problem in that sense, especially for us since we rely a lot on digital information. But I think the equation of people who are less affluent don't have access to ITC is not as true as it used to be. I think today there is a very strong digital divide still, and especially, for example, with elderly people. But it's not as clear who are the people who have access or don't have access to technology. And I think as time goes by, more and more groups and more communities have access to basic levels of digital communication, like social media, like messaging apps, and they become a crucial part of their communication. Sometimes even they're mobile first, so it's the way that they communicate more than anything else. And I think that's something that we need to consider when we're thinking of the next 5 or 10 years of engagement in that sense.
Very interesting. Archana, last thoughts?
I think this is one of those things where I would encourage cities to just adopt inclusion as one of the core themes. I think this topic is timely, but it's also timeless. because when you don't include, you will end up excluding, and when you exclude, the city will suffer in many ways.
Gap.
Yeah, and so it's very important to always have that as one of the core philosophies of whatever you do, and I think that really helps helps define what you want to be as a city.
No doubt. With that, I think I would like to thank you all. It was a great discussion, very diverse, but needed for this kind of topic. So again, thanks to New Cities Foundation for bringing us all together, giving us this platform to talk about various perspectives, and thank you all for being here.